Hello, class, and welcome to week one's formative assessment tutorial. All right, so each week I will do a how-to video for each of your formative assessments. For this class, formative assessments are the same thing as a lab assignment. And so you have your week one formative assessment, which is on significant figures. And so I want to go through what you'll be doing with significant figures and what you'll be doing for this assignment. So as you can see, okay, so this is a pretty lengthy assignment. And so you want to make sure that you allow yourself plenty of time to do the work for this assignment. All right, so let's go through it. At the top here, you'll find all your instructions, and then you'll see your actual questions. And so when we're dealing with significant figures in chemistry, this is our way to determine how to round our calculated numbers. Because if you've ever calculated numbers for a math class or another science class, you often get a lot of numbers in your calculator and you're not sure what numbers you should actually put in your answer. And so for chemistry, we have a set of rules that determines how we do our rounding for calculations, and we call it significant figures. And so the rules are here as follows. So if we have numbers that are all non-zero, they are all considered to be significant. So for example, if we have 333.3, because all of those numbers are significant, then we have four significant figures. There's no zeros in there. But say we have zeros. So we have different types of zeros. We have zeros which we call sandwich zeros. And then we have zeros that are at the end or at the beginning of a number. So zeros that were sandwiched or zeros in between non-zero numbers, they are said to be significant. So 303 has three significant figures because that zero is in between the 3 and the 3. But if we have a zero in the front or a zero in the end, it all depends on if there's a decimal present or not. And so say we have 330 with a decimal. You visibly see that decimal. That decimal makes that N zero significant. Okay. But say we had a number that was, let me see if I see the example of what I'm looking for. I don't. But say we had a decimal here. Say there was a decimal before the 033. So say it was 0.033. That zero here would not be significant. It's simply a placeholder. And so we would only have 3 and 3 as our two significant figures. Okay, so zeros at the beginning are not significant. Zeros at the end are only significant if there's a decimal somewhere. Okay, the decimal doesn't have to be right there. It could be at the beginning. But as long as that zero is at the end and there is a visible decimal somewhere in the number, that zero is significant. All right. So if we have 4.01 times 3.01, these two zeros are in between non-zero numbers, so both of them are significant. When you're multiplying numbers, you always go with the least number of significant figures, and that's how you round the answer at the end. So 4.01 has three significant figures. 3.01 also has three significant figures. And so since they're both three, your final answer should have three significant figures. Okay. So let's look at another example where they're not the same. So we have, excuse me, 5.79909,383. So that has one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine significant figures. That zero's significant because it's between the two nines, okay? And then we have 3.01, which only has three significant figures. So when you calculate this answer, you only want three significant figures because you always go with the least for multiplication. And that's also true for division as well. Generally, the most we do is multiplication and division, but we do we do some addition and subtraction as well. So let's look at this number up here at the top. 2.22 has three significant figures, 2.00000999. Now there are one, two, three, four zeros here, but they are between a 2 and a 9. So it doesn't matter how many zeros are in between the non-zero numbers, they are still significant. So that gives us 5, 6, 7, that's 8 significant figures. So three significant figures and eight significant figures. If we were multiplying, we would go at the least, which would be 3. But because we are adding, we look at numbers after the decimal. So 2.22 has two numbers after the decimal. 2.00000999 has seven numbers after the decimal, so you go with the least. So when you add this up, your answer is 4.22 with two numbers after the decimal. You'll always go with the least. So that's for addition and subtraction. So for multiplication and division, remember you go with the least number of significant figures. For addition and subtraction, you go with the smallest number of decimal places. Okay. So you'll need to know how to do significant figures, not only for this lab assignment, but also for any of the calculations that you do moving forward in this class. So pay close attention to this lab. That will help you, okay? And if you have questions, always reach out to me and let me know. There's also a couple of videos within the supplemental material within this week's module that'll help you with significant figures as well. All right, so the next thing that we're looking at, because we don't always do just simple math like this, where we're multiplying or adding numbers, but we involve units as well. And so the way that we do calculations with units, we call it the factor label method. Okay, and with this, we are looking at how we are setting up our problems. And so go through this materials, make sure that you understand it, but I want to look at a couple problems and how we set up these problems so you can see what I mean about the factor label method. And so say you are starting out with 10 grams of water, okay, in the form of ice, and you want to know how many milliliters you have. You're given the information of the density, which is 0.917 grams per milliliter. So we're going to start off with our 10 grams of water. We're going to multiply it by milliliters over 0.917 grams of water. And so when we're setting up our problems, the units that you start with, you're going to put those units at the bottom, okay? You're going to divide that number, um, those units. When you put those units down at the bottom, they cancel out. And so the units that you're left with, which are the ones on top, should be the units that you want for your final answer. So that's how you know if you set up your problem correctly to do the correct solving. And so you're going to take 10 divided by 0.917. Now, 0.917 has three significant figures, but 10 only has one. And so your answer would actually only have one decimal. So to do this, because 10.9 would round up to 11, 11 is still two significant figures. Generally, I like to give problems that have at least two to three significant figures because it makes a nice, better number. But this one only has one, so in order to round this to one significant figure, you would need to put this into scientific notation. And so with scientific notation, which I think I have an example. Okay, I'm just going to write in here just so that you can see it. So 10.9, if we put that in scientific notation, okay, you would move this decimal over one place, and that would be equivalent to 1.1. Okay, so we move that decimal place over one time. So it'd be times 10 to the first power because we moved it over and took a larger number to make it into scientific notation. But that's still two significant figures. So how would we make that one significant figure? We would take the point one off and we would say times 10 to the 1, okay? 1 times 10 to the 1. So that would be how we would change that number to one significant figure. But again, in general, I like to give at least 2 to 3 significant figures so that you don't have to worry about doing that. All right. The last thing that we look at for this particular lab assignment is looking at moles. Moles are a unit that we use in chemistry to understand things like atoms, things like molecules, grams, and compare it to moles. And so we have what is known as Avogadro's number. So 1 mole is equal to 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd things. And we say things because things could be a lot of different items. It could be, excuse me, it could be atoms if we're talking about an element. It could be molecules if we're talking about a compound. Okay. And so it has different terminology depending on what you're talking about. So let's look at an example if we're looking at grams to moles. And then there's another example in your actual assignment where you're looking at atoms, okay? But we're going to look at grams first. So if we have 100.0 grams of silver, and we want to know how many moles of silver. So silver, if you're looking in your periodic table, so this you will need a periodic table in front of you to do the assignment because some of these items you'll need to look at numbers in the periodic table. And so I have a periodic table above um, on my wall in my office. And so when we're talking about silver, silver has a symbol of Ag. So if you look at Ag in the periodic table, that bottom number, you're going to see it's 107.86. That tells you how many grams of silver are in 1 mole of silver. Okay. It's also listed here in the problem, but I want you to be able to look in the periodic table and see that number as well. And so if we take 100.0 and we divide it, because any numbers on the bottom you want to divide, any numbers on the top you want to multiply. So 100.0 divided by 107.86, we get 0.927. Now we want to look at those significant figures because we want to make sure our answer is the correct number. And so we have 100.0 that has 4 significant figures because that decimal is there and all those zeros are at the end. It makes them all significant. Okay. So that's 4. And then 107.86 has 5. And so if we take 4 divided by 5 significant figures, you always go with the least. And so that's going to be 4. So we're going to take that 0.927 and we're going to make it 4 significant figures. So 0.927. If we simply add a 0 at the end, then that makes that 4 significant figures. So say your calculator only gives you 3, but you need 4, then you can always add a 0 at the end. As long as there's a visible decimal in that number, then that 0 is significant, okay? So that will help you out with that. All right. So then as you go through each of these problems, they'll ask for different things. So this one asks for um, create a random number with at least 4 digits to the left of the decimal and 4 to the right. At least 2 of the digits must be 0. So list the number here and explain how many significant figures you have. So you've got to put your number. You got to tell what the significant figures are. You're going to tell me if the zeros are significant and why or why not. So there are 4 things that you need to list here. That's why you get 4 points. So you get 1 point for each thing. So very important for each of these problems You have to look at up here underneath the excuse me, information about the question. It tells you what you need to put in this space provided, okay? So it's very important that you list all these things so that you can get all the points, okay? So very important. This one needs two numbers. So I need two numbers to get the 2 points. All right, so this one is actually a calculation, and you want to describe why the numbers which are rounded always away don't matter. So all of that information you need to put there. All right. And so go through each of these problems. If you have questions, let me know. With the calculations, I did provide a calculator. Okay. So you click on this little calculator button and you'll see calculator pop up. Make sure that your pop-ups are enabled for this to work. And I am not sure if this will work on your phone. Okay, so it might be important that you do this on the computer. Okay, so if you're having difficulties with it coming up on your phone or you try to do it on the phone, it's not working right, you may need to do it on the computer. So everywhere you see a calculation, there is a calculator that's provided. Very important. Once you've completed all your work, you want to make sure you hit that submit button. Once you've hit the submit button, then it goes, it's submitted so that it is ready to be graded. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. All right, and I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great week.